Learn to add new dimension to your jewelry making today on Beads, Baubles and Jewels.
Beads, Baubles and Jewels has been brought to you in part by Beading Daily, your jewelry making resource for how-to projects, books, magazines, DVDs, events, and online learning. BeadingDaily.com. Beadalon, a manufacturer of flexible bead stringing wires, memory wire, artistic wire, stringing materials, innovative findings, and tools to help you fashion your own jewelry. Beadalon.com. Dreamtime Creations, an online supplier of crystals, findings, and jewelry making supplies since 1989. DreamtimeCreations.com. Halcraft, jewelry component manufacturer. Halcraft.com.
Unusual shapes, interesting materials, and innovative techniques add dimension and originality to your jewelry designs. Part of being a designer is that repertoire keeps expanding as you're exposed to new things. Each of today's designers is known for always changing by adding to their style. First up is Carrie Bogart with an angular design wire pendant inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright. Then Kate Richberg is back with techniques for texturing metal. Next, on today's workshop, we make stretchy bracelets using crystal pearls and rondelles. Finally, Melinda Barta teaches us how to stitch a tubular peyote ring and how to use peyote to create other shapes. Now let's begin with Carrie. I'm here with author Kerry Bogert, and Kerry has some great ideas for using wire embroidery. Kerry, I love the pendant.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome. What a cool technique.
Yeah, something I developed for my new book, Wire Embroidery. I was in Barnes & Noble, was walking and looking at different craft books, and I saw some stitching, and I thought, I can do that with wire and metal.
Yeah, right, and it combines your love of fiber with metal too.
Yeah, it does.
Perfect.
So we're gonna start by making a pendant I call Wright's bow tie.
Okay.
So all you need is a brass blank, and we begin by taking a marker and drawing the design. And one of the special tools you need for wire embroidery is a pair of punch pliers. And what this is going to do is put the hole in your work that you need, so that as if you were sewing with a needle and thread, since your wire can't make it through the metal, this makes the hole, and you're going to pass your wire through just like it's a needle.
So it does require a little bit of planning.
Yeah, it does. So that's why we draw the design, and then we're going to find important points where we're going to want the wire to go in and out from the front to the back of the work.
Okay.
So punch pliers, pretty easy.
Super easy.
Yeah. I know mine, when they start to wear out the punch, it can get stuck. Just grab some change nose pliers and pop it off.
Okay.
And then once if your blade ever really wears out, you can get replacement punches for them. So after you've got all your holes punched, you want to take a second and make sure you file down any rough edges that are left from the pliers. If you don't do that, as you pass your wire through, with colored copper wires, sometimes the metal can scrape it and you would lose some of the coloring. So if you take a second just to clean up the back of any of those sharp edges, your wire will stay nice and colorful.
Okay.
So.
And can you do it with any diameter of wire, any gauge?
You really want to stick with more 24 or 26 gauge.
Okay.
You want something small enough that will fit in the holes, and in some cases there's going to be multiple times that you go through the same hole, and if it's too thick of a wire, it'll get stuck. So
okay.
Once you've got all your holes punched, you need to make a back plate, because just like actual wire or embroidery you do with floss, the back isn't as pretty as the front is. So we want to make a back plate that's going to cover up our work at the end. So mark your corners and punch a plate. So to get started, you just need a length of wire. And I begin by making a simple spiral, because it needs to anchor to the back of the work. Come up from the back to the front, just like that.
Okay.
And the spiral stays on the back, and that keeps.
You can kind of bend it down to hold it in place.
At the end, we'll take chain nose pliers, and we can kind of pinch it flat if it's raised at any area. So you just keep working, going in and out, front to back, building your design. Turn.
Do you have a plan before you start about how you're going to stitch? Or are you, I mean, I can tell you're following the lines, but does it matter where you start?
You do want to think ahead of time where you want things to be. I know when I designed it, I wanted to layer the look of the bow with the lines on top. So I'm stitching the things that should be in the back first, and then stitching what would be in the front. So you think about it a little bit. As you go, it starts to build up, and it just kind of has a bit of an organic process to it.
Okay.
So once we get to our design being complete, we can add our back plate, and then same thing, we'll start with a spiral, and this time we're kind of making a sandwich.
And you're making sure that the spiral is buried in the middle there.
Right in between here, we've got the spiral buried.
Okay.
And then if need be, you can take your pliers and kind of pinch it so it's flat. This pre-made blank actually had one hole punched in it, so once I'm finished stitching this around the edge, I can just pop a jump ring in it, and it's ready for a length of chain.
Yeah, now do you do a running stitch or just one big stitch here to the end?
I just did one big stitch to the end here.
Okay. And just quickly maybe run through these stitches here, some different ideas of embroidery.
Sure. We have a running stitch, we have a back stitch, and a chain stitch.
This is a great example, and have you tried it with different metals?
I have, and it's fun to mix metals. You can have like a copper base and put brass wire, you can have a brass base and put sterling like I have on the samples here. I think that looks really great.
Oh, that's a great tip, and I love this bracelet.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I used a whip stitch around the edge, and I went through 3 times on that edging with a blue colored copper to
So pretty.
To give it some detail.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit about the other pieces. What about these earrings?
The earrings, I took, again, a pre-made component, and I kind of accented the design that it already had. I punched a few holes and followed the outline of the shape that was there. And one of the nice things about wire is that you can shape it after you run it in and out. So it takes on that nice little bend.
All right, and we love birds. Gotta have a bird.
Yes, yes. We have a little Tweety bird over there
Yeah.
with the necklace and the mom and dad wire components holding on to the nest.
Cute. And then also love the way that you attach the bezel with wire. These are some great tips for how to use it in a new way. A really good twist. Yeah, thanks, Carrie. And we'll be right back. I'm here with author and designer Kate Richberg and Step by Step Wire Artist of the Year.
Yes.
This is your last show with us this series.
Oh, we've done so much great stuff.
I know, and you make it look so easy too.
Well, I love to simple solder.
Exactly, that's your thing. And
That's my thing.
by this time we've had some of these tiles all created, and today you're going to show us how to do the texture one.
Yeah, texturing I think really gives some nice pattern and some interesting touches to your jewelry, so I love to texture metal.
Me too, and there are so many different ways to do it, so I'm excited to see what you're going to show us.
Yeah, so to start with this sampler, I just have a couple of plain sampler tiles here, and what I do is I put a little piece of tape over one of my tiles, and I just draw a little wavy line using my permanent marker. And then I go ahead and cut on that line using my jeweler's saw, so I have 2 pieces.
Okay, and the painter's tape just protects the surface of the metal?
Yeah, and also it really allows me to draw on with my permanent marker, and it doesn't rub off. So then after I've cut my little line, I just peel the tape right away.
Okay.
So it's just kind of a fun little way to mark on your tile without having it rub off.
Super simple.
Then I will go ahead and use my file to file these edges so they're nice and smooth. And then I'll set these guys aside because these are ready. Then I will take another plain little tile and I'll start to do the texture.
Okay.
So I've got some texturing hammers here, and you know, I always suggest take a look at what you might have at home, because a lot of different things can be used. You know, check your hammers.
Sure.
Because a lot of them will impart some great texture onto your metal. The ball side of your chasing hammer, I like to use that. This is the long side of my riveting hammer. I use that a lot for texturing. And then I do have some specialty texture hammers that do put some nice texture on your metal. But I'm going to start out with this riveting hammer. And of course we want to use a nice bench block, a surface underneath, so that when I strike the metal with my hammer, it's going to give that resistance, so I'll have some nice texturing on there. So I'm just going to come in and just give it a few little blows. And you can see we're just moving this along. And the thing when you're hammering, Katie, as you probably know, we want to use light little strokes. You know, we're making jewelry here, we're not building a house, right? So have a light touch.
That's a good tip.
As you're hammering. You don't want to hurt your metal, you just want to texture it. And see how I've just turned my metal the other way, and I'll do like a little crosshatch pattern. This is one of my favorites. I use this all the time.
And it looks so good once it has that patina too. It really brings out the contrast.
Yeah, exactly. And so once I've done that, you can see I've got my texture there. Then I'll go ahead and I'll move it over to my soldering surface. And I will get my little edges. And I'll go ahead and I'll put my paste solder on the back, and I'll just place that on. And I actually like soldering both sides at one time, but if you're kind of still unsure about that, I would start off using my medium paste solder. I'd go ahead and solder it, quench, pickle it, and then I'd come in with my second side and use easy solder for that side, and just repeat that process.
Okay.
And that's it.
So you would save time, or you would be safer using the medium solder and then going to the easy?
Right, because you know the medium solder flows at a higher temperature. The easy solder flows at a lower temperature. So as I'm soldering the second side, my first side won't come apart.
But in this case, you're using medium on both.
Well, if I wanted to do them all in one step, you know, sometimes I like to walk on the wild side, and you can just do them both at the same time. But if you did want to go step by step, you'd use medium and easy. Or if you wanted to do them all at once, put medium on both sides and solder both of the pieces on at one time.
Okay, can you show us just how you would get started with that?
Oh, sure, of course. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and grab my solder, and I'm just going to place this right here in my soldering tweezers. And I'm going to extrude just a little bit of my solder out. And you know, you've seen me use this paste solder in some of the other samplers. And I really like using the paste solder because it's pretty simple and easy to use. It's easy to go on. You don't have to add flux. All of the flux is already in that paste solder. And I've just placed a nice amount here in the center, and as it flows, or as it heats, it's going to flow out and really make this side attach. So I'll go ahead and place that down. And I don't even need to press it down. I'm just going to put it right there. And then I'll go ahead and I'll do the same thing with this other side. Extrude a little bit of that solder.
Okay.
And that's really all you need to do. I'm going to solder both of these at the same time. So again, I'm just using the medium solder.
And do you have to be careful to put it right in the center?
Well, I'm aiming for the center, because then as it flows, it's going to flow out evenly on both sides. So that's what I'm going for. But you know, you have a little bit of wiggle room with this solder, because remember, molten solder follows the heat of the torch. So if my solder, let's say, was all the way over here, I could coax it over to the ends by just using the flame. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when you get ready to torch, can you show us how to just get started?
Yeah, you bet. So of course,
safety glasses.
I've got my safety glasses on, and we're going to come in and turn this torch on, our butane micro torch, and we're just going to come in, and I'm going to introduce that flame very slowly, and you can see those little tiles have settled, and I'm just going to move the torch in a slow circle. So you can see that smoke. That's the binder burning away from the solder, a little bit of flame, but there's no problem there. You just keep soldering right through it.
Of course, you want to make sure you're working in a ventilated area.
Of course, yeah, to make sure that, you know, you've got some air going through where you're working. And one thing I want to mention, see, if I start to move my torch really fast like this, it's not heating, right? So I want to be slow and deliberate as I move that torch around. And the heat, the color of my metal, see how my copper is really starting to look like a cherry red, and I can see right a little solder line just right along the edge there and along the edge there, so I know that my solder's flowed.
All right, and then you would quench it.
And I just go ahead and quench it, and I'm ready to, and we're done.
Okay, let's take a quick look at your earrings here that have really wonderful texture. Ooh, and I love
I know, I love
too.
that sound. I always like to quench it immediately to get it cool. And yeah, you can see I've got the little texture here and here on those.
Oh, so beautiful.
Yeah.
And let's take a look also at the finished sampler here so they can see one more time what it would look like with that patina.
Yeah, that's the patina. I use liver of sulfur, but you can use any type of...
Let's look at the one that you quenched, because it does bring out that color too.
Yeah, look at this right here. And we can see we've got the fire scale on there, but it really does, you can even see where that texture is right there in the middle.
This is so fun. It's always great having you. Thank you so much,
well,
Kate.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll be right back. Everyone loves making stretchy bracelets, and they're really easy to make and they're fun to wear because you don't need a clasp. But there are some questions that I'd love to answer about stretchy bracelets. So let me start out by just showing you some fun things that you can put on them. These are crystal rondelles, and what they are is a metal piece that has faceted crystals set into the side. So they're kind of channels set there, and you actually use that as a bead spacer between other types of beads. And you can use them with anything, but I love the way you can combine the luster of crystal pearls with the faceted crystals. It just has a really great look. And of course they come in lots of different colors, and they also come in different sizes. So you'll want to choose one that works well with the beads that you're using. For example, these are 8mm, so I used a slightly larger rondelle. Now on this bracelet, I chose 6mm pearls with the 6mm rondelle. And this is a really great birthstone project because you could make them in the birthstones of the person that you're giving a gift to. You can choose the crystals in their favorite color. They also make great gifts for bridesmaids and bridal parties. So the way that you do it is you make the bracelet as long as you want to. 7.5 inches is a standard length. And I recommend leaving the stretchy cord on the spool so that as you're threading it on, you start out with a rondelle. Now, normally you would think about tying the knot in the back of the bracelet, but in this case, the hole on the rondelle is a little bit bigger than the pearls, so your knot is actually going to be hidden in the front. So I'll go ahead and trim this end and then tie my knot. Now, tips for tying knots in stretchy cord, it can be a little bit tricky because it's kind of slippery. So you want to make a square knot, which is just one side over the other. So I did right over left, and now I'll go back the other way, left over right, and I'm going to do a second wrap. So there's one, and then I'll do another where I pass it through the loop again. So that's called a surgeon's knot. And when you tie it, that makes your knot really nice and tight. And you want to snug this all down so that it's good and tight. And you can pull it a little bit, give it some tension, see if your knot is tight enough. If it isn't, you can hold it in both hands and then pull all 4 directions. So you're kind of pulling while you adjust the knot. So you kind of stretch it and give it some tension. Okay, now the next step is really important. You'll want to add some jeweler cement, some speed stringing glue right here on the knot, and then set this aside to dry until your glue is completely cured. Now don't use a cyanoacrylate glue because that can get brittle and stiff and cause your bracelet to break. So make sure that it's a glue that has a flexible bond. Now you'll come to the end and you'll just use your wire cutters to get really close to the knot and trim the ends. That's after your glue is dry. So those are some tips for stretchy bracelets. I'm here with beadwork author and editor Melinda Barta. And Melinda, you have a great idea for using peyote stitch to make shapes. Love this.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, you're
yes,
welcome.
tubular peyote rings are great because you can use them as components within designs, or you can use them to finish pretty much any project. You can make toggle rings and then simple toggle bars to go with.
All right, well, how do we get started?
Okay, first I'm going to show you just kind of an overall of how these are made. Because
Okay.
sometimes I think people get a little intimidated by them, but if you look at the big picture here, you'll see that they're
Well, and
quite easy to make.
We'll have an excerpt from your book on the website too, so people can follow along.
That's right.
Okay.
So here, these purple beads, I work them in size 11. A lot of my samples work the inner ring with size 15s, and then I use size 11s to complete the rest of the shape. But here, for this sample, I'm using size 8s and size 11s.
Okay.
So for the inner ring, it's in 11s, but then we're going to work both sides in 8s. And so we're going to start by working just one side. Then we're going to weave the needle back to the very inner ring and then work the other side.
Oh, okay.
So here I've started by stringing 40 beads for rounds 1 and 2. And then round 3 works 1 bead in each stitch, again using the 11s. And then from there, the small beads are over. Sometimes people are so relieved to be done with the 15s or the 11s and move on to the larger beads. And so here I've worked 4 rounds of size 8s. So if you're a more visual person, I'll show you here on the illustration.
All right.
So here you can see there are 3 rounds of the 11s. And remember that the first set of beads strong makes up both rounds 1 and 2. Because when you work round 3, it's going to make the beads of rounds 1 and 2 stagger.
Okay, that's a great tip. And when you're working in tubular peyote, are you always using even number of beads?
That's correct. So here I started with 40, but you're right. Depending on how large you want your shape, just start with any even number of beads. And then here you can see the 4 rounds worked in the larger beads. And then if you follow this red thread, you can see where you weave through beads to exit an inside bead of round 1. So I'll show you on this next sample. You work the next round, which is round 8, off of those round 1 beads. In this, it might seem a little awkward. So you can turn the piece over and really just add those beads, holding the beadwork however you feel comfortable. And it's also really important for these shapes to kind of keep your work a little flexible. I tend to use really tight tension, and if you use too tight a tension, later when you're kind of manipulating or wearing the jewelry, sometimes you can break beads off. And so to keep it loose, I kind of like to just make sure
that it's nice and flexible.
Yeah.
All right.
So after we've added the round 8 beads between every other bead of round 1, you can push them the other direction so that when we work the following rounds, they're going to work toward each other.
So you work all the way around the circle.
Correct.
And that would be with the smaller beads.
This is with the size,
bigger ones.
the size 8. Only the small beads are that inner ring, and we're done with the small beads.
Oh, I see. Okay. Oh, yeah, you said that. We're relieved.
Yeah, we're relieved. Yeah. So now we're going to work 2 more rounds. So what's going to happen is you'll have 4 rounds of the larger beads on one side of the inner ring and 3 rounds of the larger beads on the other side. And this is what you get. This is worked in 11s and 15s, but see how it flares up toward each other?
Right.
Now we can zip the beads together. And so you pass through 1 bead of round 7 and 1 bead of round 10, because you're going to have round 7 meet round 10 on the other side.
Oh, I see. And then they're interlocking along the edges.
That's correct. Here's a good picture of that. So here's the zipping. You're going to pass from 1 bead to the other on either side of the outside shape.
Okay. And don't you feel like this is the type of project you really have to get your hands on it?
I think,
once you start working it, I feel like the beads flow into place the way they should.
Right.
And then it becomes more clear too how you can get those pieces together.
Exactly. I think once you make your first one, you're good to go.
And you just start whipping them up, like you did here. I love these toggles. They're so pretty, the colors you chose. But this one especially, you added the little picots too.
That's correct. Yep. And some of them added little gold collars.
So you could also use the rings to link things together, like you did here.
Correct. And this one here, I added the picots along the outside edge to mirror the really neat shape of these pewter components.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Now, what about the links, where you created a chain out of the ovals? How do you change the shape to the oval?
Now, with the ovals, we stitch them exactly the way I just showed you for the rings, but the difference is that in the starting rounds 1 and 2, we're going to use a mix of size 11s and size 15s. So those smaller 15s within that ring are going to kind of cinch up 2 sides.
Okay.
And that's what's give you the oval shape. So you don't need any kind of fancy increases or decreases. It's just that simple change in bead size.
Wow.
It's pretty neat.
Yeah, very.
Yeah. Now let me show you some other shapes, because once you've mastered these rings, you can move on to more interesting shapes. And there we do have a change in bead.
Okay. And we'll have the pattern on the website so people can check that out. And quickly before we go, we'll take a look at this square, because the square is really cool too, and mixing it with the circular shapes. I love what you did.
Thanks, yeah. And you can see there's just a spine of herringbone stitches, and that's the difference here. More beads in each stitch on the corners creates the shapes.
Okay, well thank you so much, Melinda. And thank you for watching. Remember that lots of other mix and match techniques are featured on our website from this series and from past episodes. Join us next time as we look at some new dimensions in jewelry making.
Instructions for today's projects, plus other ideas, techniques, and tutorials are available on the web at beadsbaublesandjewels.com. This is Show 1812. If you enjoyed today's show and want to see more projects and great guests, download individual episodes for $2.99 each, or order a complete DVD set of the entire Beads, Baubles and Jewels Series 1800 for $29.95 plus shipping and handling at beadsbaublesandjewels.com. Don't miss a single episode. Beads, Baubles and Jewels has been brought to you in part by Beading Daily, your jewelry making resource for how-to projects, books, magazines, DVDs, events, and online learning. BeadingDaily.com. Beadalon, a manufacturer of flexible bead stringing wires, memory wire, artistic wire, stringing materials, innovative findings, and tools to help you fashion your own jewelry. Beadalon.com. Dreamtime Creations, an online supplier of crystals, findings, and jewelry making supplies since 1989. Dreamtimecreations.com. Halcraft, jewelry component manufacturer. Halcraft.com.